The Reformation, a revolution in Christianity. The Protestant Reformation, often referred to simply as the Reformation, was one of the most significant upheavals in European history. Beginning in the early 16th century, it fundamentally changed the religious, political, and cultural landscape of Europe and continues to influence Christian thought and practice today. At its core, the Reformation was a movement aimed at reforming the beliefs and practices of the Catholic Church, which had held a near monopoly on Christian doctrine in Western Europe for over a millennium. The Reformation challenged that dominance, fracturing Western Christianity and leading to the birth of Protestantism. 1. Historical context. Europe on the eve of the Reformation. To understand why the Reformation happened, we need to look at the context of late medieval Europe. The Catholic Church was the most powerful institution in Europe. It wielded not only spiritual authority, but also political and economic power, often acting like a state within a state. However, by the late 15th and early 16th centuries, many people across Europe had grown increasingly critical of the Church's practices. Some of the key issues that led to widespread dissatisfaction included corruption within the clergy. Many church leaders, including the Pope, were accused of leading decadent lives, far removed from the spiritual and moral ideals of Christianity. Simony and nepotism. High-ranking church positions were often bought and sold, while church offices were given to relatives of powerful bishops, cardinals, and even popes. Sale of indulgences. The Church taught that indulgences could reduce the amount of time a soul spent in purgatory. While this practice had a long history, by the early 16th century the sale of indulgences had become a widespread and highly criticized form of fundraising. These issues were compounded by broader cultural changes. The Renaissance, which began in Italy and spread across Europe, brought about a renewed interest in classical learning, humanism, and critical inquiry. This intellectual ferment made people more willing to question authority, including the Church. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century by Johannes Gutenberg allowed new ideas to spread quickly, laying the groundwork for the dissemination of Reformation thought. 2. Martin Luther and the spark of the Reformation. While many had called for reforms within the Church, it was the actions of a German monk named Martin Luther that ignited the Reformation. In 1517, Luther, a professor of theology at the University of Wittenberg, nailed his famous 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church, although some historians debate whether this act actually occurred in this way. Luther's 95 Theses were a critique of the Catholic Church's practices, particularly the sale of indulgences. He argued that salvation could not be bought or earned through good works, but was a free gift of God's grace, received by faith alone, sola fide. This core doctrine would become central to Protestant theology. Luther's teachings were revolutionary for several reasons. Sola scriptura, Scripture alone. Luther insisted that the Bible, not the Church, was the ultimate authority in matters of faith and practice. This was a direct challenge to the Catholic Church's teaching that tradition and papal authority were equally important. Priesthood of all believers. Luther argued that all Christians had direct access to God through faith, and that no priestly intermediary was necessary. This undermined the hierarchical structure of the Church. Rejection of papal authority. Luther rejected the authority of the Pope and called for reforms in church governance. Luther's ideas quickly spread throughout Europe, thanks in large part to the printing press. While he initially sought to reform the Church from within, his writings led to a rupture between him and the Pope. In 1521, Luther was excommunicated by Pope Leo VI. The Diet of Worms, convened later that year by Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, declared Luther an outlaw. Protected by sympathetic German princes, Luther continued to write and teach, helping to lay the foundations for the spread of Protestantism. 3. The spread of Protestantism. Luther's ideas resonated with many people across Europe, and soon new Protestant movements began to emerge. John Calvin and Calvinism. In Switzerland, John Calvin, 1509–1564, became a leading figure in the Reformation. Calvin's theological writings, particularly his emphasis on God's sovereignty and the doctrine of predestination, became the foundation of Calvinism, which spread across Europe, particularly in France, the Netherlands, and Scotland. Ulrich Zwingli and the Swiss Reformation. Ulrich Zwingli, 1484–1531, led the Reformation in Zurich, Switzerland. Like Luther, Zwingli emphasized the authority of Scripture, but he went even further in rejecting traditional Catholic practices such as the veneration of saints, the use of images in worship, and the belief in transubstantiation in the Eucharist. The English Reformation. The Reformation in England took a unique path. King Henry VIII initially opposed Protestantism, but when the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry broke with Rome and declared himself the head of the Church of England in 1534. The English Reformation had both political and religious dimensions, with Henry's break from Rome motivated more by personal and political concerns than by theology. However, Protestant ideas gradually took root in England, particularly under the reign of Henry's son, Edward VI, and later Elizabeth III, Anabaptists and radical reformers. While many reformers like Luther and Calvin sought to work within the framework of society, more radical groups emerged that advocated for a complete break from the established church and state structures. The Anabaptists, for example, rejected infant baptism, arguing that only adults could make a genuine profession of faith. Anabaptist communities, often persecuted by both Catholics and Protestants, emphasized pacifism, communal living, and separation from state control. 4. The Catholic Counter-Reformation. The rise of Protestantism forced the Catholic Church to respond. This response, known as the Counter-Reformation, involved both internal reform and efforts to combat the spread of Protestantism. The Catholic Church convened the Council of Trent, 1545–1563, to address many of the criticisms raised by Protestants and to clarify Catholic doctrine. The Council reaffirmed traditional Catholic teachings, including the authority of the Pope, the importance of both Scripture and tradition, and the validity of indulgences, though the sale of indulgences was curtailed. The Council also initiated reforms aimed at addressing clerical corruption, improving the education of priests, and enhancing the moral discipline of the clergy. One of the key elements of the Counter-Reformation was the rise of new religious orders, particularly the Jesuits, founded by Ignatius of Loyola in 1540. The Jesuits became known for their missionary work, their role in education, and their commitment to defending Catholicism in Europe and abroad. 5. The Reformation's broader impact. The Reformation was not only a religious movement, it also had profound political, social, and cultural consequences. Political fragmentation. The Reformation contributed to the fracturing of the Holy Roman Empire, with many German princes adopting Protestantism as a way of asserting their independence from both the emperor and the pope. This led to a series of religious conflicts, culminating in the 30 Years' War, 1618–1648, a devastating conflict that reshaped the political map of Europe. Rise of religious pluralism. For over 1,000 years, Western Europe had been united under a single Christian church. The Reformation shattered that unity. By the mid-16th century, Europe was divided between Catholic and Protestant regions. This division laid the groundwork for the development of religious pluralism in Europe, a shift that would eventually lead to the modern concept of religious tolerance. Cultural and intellectual change. The emphasis on individual faith and the authority of Scripture helped pave the way for the development of modern ideas about individual rights and the importance of conscience. The Reformation also had a significant impact on education. with both Protestants and Catholics establishing schools and universities to promote their respective religious teachings. Economic and social changes. Some historians have argued that Protestantism, particularly Calvinism, contributed to the rise of capitalism in Europe by encouraging values such as hard work, thrift, and individual responsibility. While this theory, known as the Weber thesis, remains controversial, it highlights the potential connection between religious ideas and economic development. 6. Legacy of the Reformation. The Reformation forever altered the landscape of Christianity and Europe. Its legacy can be seen in the diversity of Christian denominations today, with Protestantism now comprising a significant portion of the global Christian population. The theological principles that emerged from the Reformation, justification by faith, the authority of Scripture, and the priesthood of all believers, continue to shape Christian thought and practice. Moreover, the Reformation's influence extends beyond religion. It helped foster the development of modern democracy, the separation of church and state, and the principle of religious freedom. In this way, the Reformation was not only a religious revolution, but also a profound turning point in the development of the modern world. The Reformation was a complex and multifaceted event that reshaped Europe in the 16th century. While it began as a movement to reform the Catholic Church, it quickly evolved into a broader religious, political, and social revolution. Its impact continues to be felt today, as the Reformation set the stage for the development of modern Christianity, the rise of nation-states, and the eventual emergence of religious tolerance in the West. It was truly one of the defining moments of Western history.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Delving into the Deep for regular updates.